Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Domain tools help security analysts turn threat data into threat intelligence. They take indicators from your network, including domains and IP addresses, and connect them with nearly every active domain on the internet. Those connections drive risk assessments, help profile attackers, guide online fraud investigations, and map cyber activity to attacker infrastructure. Fortune 1000 companies, global government agencies, and leading security solutions vendors use the Domain Tools platform as a critical ingredient in their threat investigations and proactive defenses. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/domain tools. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul Security Weekly. This is our security news segment for this evening. Quick announcement: one of our illustrious co-hosts, Patrick Laverty, will be co-presenting pen testing tips, tricks, and stories with Aaron Herndon at B-Sides Connecticut 2019. Ticket sales are open until the end of the show. Set until the day of the show, which is
time is running out.
Bye now. It's not until November 2019. But you must get your tickets today.
You got about 40 minutes before. Anyway, so Saturday, November 3rd is the end. Until the day of the show. That's made me confused with our show. They're $20. You can go to bsidesct.org and register now. And now I have John Walsh's intro. He's a DevOps evangelist at Cyber. Oh, we established that already.
We've already done that.
Yeah, we did that.
It was again if you want.
If it's on the teleprompter, Burgundy reads it. John is still here with us, of course. So
it's Paul's age. You know, when you get a little older, you start to repeat yourself. And,
that's right.
You know,
things get all wilty.
Sam, you're gonna grab his walker for him, and so he can, get out of the studio tonight. I'm not sure he's going to make it.
I know, I need glasses. That's a sure sign you're getting old. So, security news. There was an article that was published to a site, Dark Reading, and it was about auditing. And the title kind of grabbed me, and I'm not sure if it was clickbaity or not, but I really think they're being serious. And now I get the point. So here's the thing. The title is Audits, the Missing Layer in Cybersecurity. And so when you hear that, you're like, whoa, hold on. There's a lot of things that we could point out as be missing in people's security programs, and like auditing is not really. It's not high up on my list. Anyone else? Is it like near high up on your list? Carlos had to drop.
No, boo, hiss.
Right?
No, yeah.
But here's the thing. I think when I thought about my first experience with auditing, right?
Your first experience?
It was an experience because I had never, as a security person, I had never kind of interfaced with auditing. I'm like, well, this is interesting. Like, our goals are pretty aligned, right, on the surface. And I realized that the audit was, like, they were just asking me questions about lots of things, what I did, how I did them, and then the state of things. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. Like, what prevents me from being the hacker mindset? I'm like, what stops me from lying? Right? And just,
not a damn thing.
Right? Like, not a damn thing. And so then I said to the auditor, I'm like, well, if you really want to know the state of the systems, like, we should do things like run a vulnerability scan.
Right.
That'd be awesome. Right? And then, of course, back then you find some pretty heinous problems, and I made people a lot upset because they're like, hold on. We had these audits. Things used to go really well.
Yeah.
Paul came along, and like the pigeon flew in, shit all over everyone, and then flew away. Like, what is up with that?
The first time I ever did an audit, I went in and I had no idea what to do. These people asked me, can you come do this? And they had been doing audits, And I went in and I actually sat down and started testing things. I didn't,
yeah.
And then I got yelled at for
I
like
did
15
too,
minutes
yes.
because they were like, what the hell is this?
How dare you?
We have passed this with flying colors every year for 5 years, and now all of a sudden here you are, and we've got every single thing is marked wrong, fail. And I'm like, that's because they don't do any of these things.
I'm glad it was just not just me.
No, it was like I was just sitting there like, I don't know, I'm sorry. I thought that's what they wanted me to do. And they were
I
like,
was
no.
just being diligent.
You ask the IT person, did you use passwords? And they say yes. And then you put a check mark.
Right.
You don't go look to see if there's actually passwords there. I'm like, you have anonymous logins. Like, we don't want to hear that crap. Yeah, it was bad. And
I felt really bad about that pretty much until just now.
If I may.
Go ahead, Jeff.
In deference to those listeners that might be auditors, and I certainly know some, and I don't know if I respect them, but I have friends that are auditors. I don't respect.
Now, I haven't talked about the benefits of auditing. So if you're in auditing, Jeff, and you're listening, right?
I'm a big advocate. You just got to do it right.
Okay, so Jeff, go ahead.
Well, what I want to say is, I think one of the fundamental problems with an audit process is the people that write the audit requirements typically are pretty smart and they're pretty thorough. What is often lacking and mileage varies is the people that are reading the questions, that are asking the questions. They don't always have the background, the knowledge, the context of knowing what they're asking, what it means in a bigger picture. And I have to throw in a little pitch or a thumbs up for PCI, because the beauty of PCI, if done correctly, was always you ask the question, are you using passwords? And they could lie to you. But then the beauty of PCI to me was always, okay, now let's go look.
Yeah.
Show me how your systems are configured. Show me your vulnerability scans. Show me your pen test report. Show me your hardening standards. Show me your password rules, and so on and so forth. So there was always this element, because a lot of my customers were accustomed to this audit process. I can say whatever I want. But the rubber hit the road when we went and looked at the systems. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't look like what you said that you were doing.
Well, also, I think before we get to some of the things that I think Doug and I probably agree on that we like about auditing is that you should ask yes/no questions. Those have to be intermixed with like how and what questions, and then, as Jeff said, then go like actually look at things, right? And
percentage, yeah.
And so we use your what I think is kind of a lame question, like, do you use passwords? If the answer is yes, it's like, okay, well, how do you use passwords?
Okay, best one on that. Okay.
Well,
so I asked this girl.
One more thing, and then I'll let Doug and you guys
go ahead, Jeff.
pontificate.
It's okay.
I think it's important for us to define our terms, because PCI since the very beginning has been called an audit. I've got a customer right now that keeps referring to it as an audit. It's not, and it's an assessment. And the difference is, and it's sort of a legal thing from the PCI perspective, but an audit is when you are asking these questions, you're looking for something measuring to an exact standard. Like, do you use passwords? Are they 8 characters long? Do they have uppercase, lowercase characters? There's some sort of an exact thing that you're measuring against. Are you doing this? Yes, no. Whereas an assessment is more of, let's take a look at things and let's take a look at whether you're doing things correctly or whether you're doing things, according to industry or security best practices. So it's more of a judgment call. It requires the person that, and I was often and still am called an auditor, it requires that person to have a background knowledge, have some sort of clue as to what it's all about, and make a judgment call in many cases. But it's not necessarily you're doing the right thing according to this measuring stick. You're doing the right thing based on what your business is, what your environment is, what all your different factors that get come into play, your connectivity, your third-party connections, and so on and so forth, which is what the nature of security is. It's we talked about it on an earlier segment. It's very subjective at times. It's hard to have a precise, like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's hard to have one exact one size fits all. This is how you do security, because every environment is different. And there's all sorts of different factors that go into it. So I'll shut up and let you guys say what you like about the audit.
Financial audit does the same thing, though. A financial audit doesn't just ask you a question and say, "Do you trade, with this?" They drill down and they test and they look at how. They just don't know how to do it. When they reassigned auditors from accounting over to doing security audits, they had no idea what to ask people. But my funny story that Jeff cut off was that.
Wait, one more thing.
My story was, only mutes me. It only mutes me.
My story was that I asked this woman, I said, "Do you use strong passwords?" And she said, "No, it's Valley Days." And I said, "What?" And she said, "No, it's not strong. It's Valley Days." And I was like, "What is Valley Days?" And she said, the password for the systems. And I was like, "Oh, well, let me write that down." Okay.
Let me write that down for later.
It was all passwords.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, we've already identified that there's varying skill sets of auditors, which is why it's harder to ask if you don't have the knowledge and understanding the how and the what questions. Like, how are you enforcing your password policy, and how are you measuring the effectiveness of your security controls around your passwords,
and like Jeff said, and how does it work from this system to this system to this system?
Yeah.
Because you'll go into a company and they've got Apple, they've got Windows, they've got Active Directory, they've got MVS with RACF mainframe stuff, and all those are different kinds of systems that behave in different ways, and that's really challenging for people that have never seen any of that stuff.
But if let's say I'm the CISO of an organization, right? I think for me in that position, the value of an audit is not so much auditing the state of my systems, it's auditing my processes. I would, in certain circumstances and where this makes sense, right, if you have an audit, I want to know where I'm deficient and where I'm strong in my processes. Where did you...
I agree.
And you can do this without... You don't have to necessarily go in and do a full-blown pen test or phone scan, right? You can have someone that's pretty smart that goes in and understands the security landscape and asks people questions and come back and say, "You're deficient in these areas process-wise. Here's the process improvements you need to make." That's where I think huge amounts of value.
Absolutely.
I agree and disagree, Paul, because while it's important to be able to have that background knowledge so you can go in and make a judgment call on how the processes are working, from an audit perspective, from a measurement perspective, how do you do that? And how do you?
It's tricky. Yep, I agree. Yeah.
I mean, one is subjective and one is objective. Maybe that's the way to describe it. Audits tend to be objective, where assessments are more towards the subjective. And there's a lot of really, really smart auditors out there that I've met. But I think if I could try to synthesize it down to something that, and this is not meant to mean that we're better than anybody else, those of us in the hacker community, but I really do see a difference between people that have had hands-on experience, whether they're hackers or whether they're admins or whether they're developers. You have a different view of the world than if you've just sort of have the book knowledge, the professional training, certs or whatever, but you've never really been in the trenches and done it. You can be smart about it and have a book knowledge, but there's still a difference between that and having actually done things.
And that's the two layers you're talking about, and Paul was talking about too. One of those layers is up here, this subjective layer of policy and procedure stuff. Do you use strong passwords? Here's what we're defining as that. And then this objective layer of how do we go in there and test this RACF system to see if you actually have strong passwords on all these accounts. How do we go in and test this Active Directory system, and on and on and on. And so there are two different layers, and they almost require two different personality types to look at. And it's a long, drawn-out process.
Well, it's knowledge, right? So like you keep mentioning RACF. I've seen like where people actually in sessions where they're auditors, they're trying to learn what RACF is and like how it works, right? Well, good luck with that. So like they're not usually technical people. It's not really personality, it's their skills, the skill set. Right, and then like some of these compliance frameworks, it's something like make sure that production data can't be accessed from development, so on and so forth. How does an auditor figure that out? He needs technical skills, or she needs technical skills to figure out, okay, it's via these accounts, via these SSH keys, passwords, whatever it is, they can access this, and they can access that through like a transitive trust. You know,
And
auditors aren't
it's
gonna
just
know
like pen testing. You got to have a team.
Yeah.
Everybody's got
Right.
different skills. So you've got those people that are sitting there. Like I had an auditor on my team who was an accountant. And that person was making sure that we were looking at this from the right perspective audit-wise. Like, were you asking the right questions and all these things? And then they had me to sit there and say, well, this is what you could look at in Active Directory. And, oh, have you considered that? And, oh, there's another account on that AS400 called SecOffer. Did they change the password on that too? Oh, they didn't? Well, there's a big problem.
Right. Yeah.
And people that had those kind of like hacker skill sets that held these like little minutia details were really, really useful for looking around that corner and looking at, we didn't just test this one real basic thing. There was all these other pieces of it that we really ought to look at, because it's not just a matter of did everybody use 8 characters in their password.
Yeah. And what I like about the audit is it sounds like you actually want to find out what the best result is. You want to find out the best way to make sure you're completely secure. And then when you think of compliance, usually you think of like what checks the box. Like, all right, I met that, done. Met this, done. Which essentially is like saying
I actually think the perception is the exact opposite of what you've just said.
For audits. Right. No, but I think for compliance in general, people they're trying to meet that compliance framework, and they're just trying to move on. They don't want to spend extra money or time or cycles on trying to be more compliant.
Yeah, they just want the certificate.
Right, exactly.
Do we still have to, changing gears, talk about IoT security and the lack thereof? Because I tell you what, like I see in at least a couple articles a week, and I'm like, yeah, that's like the same problem that we've been talking about.
It hasn't changed.
For 10 plus years, it hasn't changed. There was a article that was describing vulnerabilities in controllers could allow attackers to manipulate marine diesel engines. And that sounds really sexy and interesting. And then when you read it, like someone did some kind of testing or assessment and found vulnerabilities, and it's like, well, the firmware contains an undocumented drop bear SSH server with a hard-coded username and password, which is easy to crack. Well, it's like, well, yeah, like, how many times are we going to see that problem before?
You said hard-coded username and password that's easy to crack? What the hell? It's just a hard-coded username and password. I mean, shit.
That's it. Well, that's actually really interesting.
Well, not to mention that
the way they
actually
frame that
cracks passwords to begin with. But, we've only been arguing that for 30 years.
Maybe it was easy to read off your terminal screen when you run a basic strings command against the firmwr and go, oh, hey, look, it's SSH credentials.
There you go.
I think when they built a lot of these things, they weren't thinking of that as like as a computer. But nowadays, a lot of these things they're basically like a Raspberry Pi, which is like pretty much a Linux machine.
Right.
You know, so like they're thinking, oh, well, I don't have to worry about this, I don't have to worry about that. They got a little lazy when they were coding
that, and I think they were just sort of, I think they were lazy. I think a lot of people design stuff were engineers, and no offense to engineers, but they don't think about security a lot of times. How do you make something work efficiently and quickly and get the green dot instead of the red dot? And they also have the Spock problem, which is like, who would figure this out? Who's doing that?
They also had the Modbus problem too.
But that's really different from lazy.
Transmits process control information via unencrypted Modbus communications. It's like, well,
there's
I don't know. I don't want to say I get myself in trouble, but there's a lot of people with opinions that work in the industry that are like, I think my assessment from what I've observed is that forward-thinking organizations that are in industrial control systems have recognized that Modbus does not meet the requirements to satisfy integrity and security, but yet it still finds its usage. And I think that's not dissimilar to other areas. I mean, we just talked about passwords and password vaults. Right. Like maybe, like a lot of organizations haven't realized that hard coding passwords is a bad thing, but it's the forward-thinking ones that are like coming to John and going, hey, tell us about the vaulting thing. That's really cool. We want that, right? So
yeah. Same thing, different environment.
But there's also another element beyond lazy and beyond, well, it works. I mean, I think of so many customers I've had, think retailers that are nationwide and they're trying to push things out to hundreds, if not thousands of local area networks that are all over the country, and they got to push things out and they need to administer systems. It's real easy to understand why they would use, let's say, a shared account for administrative purposes, which we would all agree is probably a bad idea. But you can certainly understand why it seems like it's the practical, almost how else would you do it type of thing. So there's sort of there's the laziness, which I think, I think we we pay disrespect to too many developers and admins when we say it's lazy, because I don't think it's always lazy. I think it's more often it's sort of the business requirements / we don't have the budget. We have to do it this way to get it done versus the we didn't know any better, but it worked, so why not?
But there's also in that same environment or a boat or whatever, there's an engineering creep problem too, where we built this motor. It's this giant thing. It's got thousands of parts, and okay, this year this engine company is going to replace that part with this new part that's controllable by this other part. And I didn't respec this entire device. I just designed it initially, and it was fine. But then they came back and they put this computer controllable carburetor thing on it, or whatever. I don't know anything about engines. But they stick some piece on there, and then that thing's managed by another piece. Well, okay, the original designer doesn't know about that. That was added later, 5 years later, because they don't want to replace the entire engine. It'll cost millions of dollars. So they're just replacing this little piece. Now it runs better, and you get better efficiency out of it. Oh, but that thing's got a compromise in it.
You've added functionality so that they stick with that motor and don't go to a different motor, and they or whatever. But maybe that's a bad example.
Whatever your fancy business terms for that is, I don't care.
Yeah, or like Y2K, right, where they were using 2 digits, which was fine at the time, and then they weren't thinking ahead. You know, I agree. Lazy is the wrong word. It's just not thinking ahead.
They used 2 digit not because they were lazy. They did it to be efficient because they had very little to work with. Yeah, and saving 2 characters mattered in 1965,
right. And it matters for IoT as well.
Yeah,
right?
in a huge way. In a huge way.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Hey, can I interject a hacker adventure story?
Oh, yes. I was going to segue into that.
Story.
Yes, please do, because the stories this week, we have a few to talk about. They're not as bad as last week. Yeah.
I'm going to cut him off and tell a PCI story, though, now.
Everyone behave. Come on now.
All right,
okay,
Doug,
Jeff.
we're going to get in a room together.
All right.
So I was in Atlanta, ISSA International Conference. I spoke there yesterday. It was a lot of fun, yada, yada, yada. Good times were had by all. Whenever I go to a town, I always have to find, is there a cigar bar? Is there a cigar lounge? Where am I going to support my habit? Thanks, Paul. And when I searched for a cigar bar, I found that there was not only a cigar bar that was a block away from the conference hotel, it also was advertised as a speakeasy. So I'm like, oh, that's really cool. So
I thought you were going to say it's strip club, because that's Atlanta.
That would be the ultimate, right? But you can have a Clinton cigar.
Ooh.
Not going
so
there.
It's called the Red Phone Booth. You have to show up, and it's like an English style phone booth. You go into the phone booth, and you have to dial a number, and that'll unlock the door, or it'll ring the phone on the inside, and somebody will come open the door. And a sidebar, it was funny because I went there last night, and there was this guy that was obviously a hipster millennial standing in the phone booth, and it was a rotary phone with the old style, you pick it up and hold it to your ear thing. He had it in the cradle, and he was just kind of looking at the dial thing and just kind of spinning around. I'm like, that guy doesn't know how to use a phone. And then it occurred to me, he's probably never even heard a dial tone, because you have to go in, pick it up, and listen for the dial tone, dial the number, and then it rings and you get in. But that's not the story. So I was there. Joe Gray happened to be there speaking, so we were going to hang out. And I said, hey, I know the speakeasy. Let's go. And there was another guy with us. I won't say his name on the air because I don't have his permission, but a real cool guy, threat detection guy. We get inside, and I had my Security Weekly shirt.
Wait, hold on, Jeff. How did you figure out what the phone number was? Did you just find it on their website, or how difficult did they?
I'm not going to tell on the air because it'll be recorded. It's a social engineering exercise.
Is it written on the bottom of the phone?
Nope. We can talk about that later, but I'm not going to put it on the air.
That's fine.
That's part of the aura and the mystery.
So you figured out the puzzle. Yeah.
We got in, we're walking in, and the guy that turned out to be the owner, he sees me wearing, I have the Security Weekly shirt on that I worn for the talk. And he's like, Security Weekly, what's that? And I said, well, it's a podcast. We do computer network cybersecurity. And he's like, oh, I might want to talk to you. I need to talk to you guys. And of course, Joe picked up on it. And And we went to the humidor. We got a couple cigars. They had a nice Opus X that I got. I was going to splurge and have a nice Opus X. And we ordered a couple smoked old fashions. And so
this is a place I got to go to.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, it's a great place. I'm telling you, it's a great place.
Opus X and a smoked old fashioned.
So,
yes,
we're sitting there. I probably had, I bought these two guys cigars plus the Opus X. I probably had almost $100 in on the cigars, another probably $50 on the drinks. The guy finally comes over and he's sitting and talking to us and telling us about his problem, which I won't go into the details. And we're like, yeah, we can help you. We can help you out. So he takes us and he says, come follow me. Takes us upstairs. Turns out they also have a restaurant. And he's like, I'm hungry. Takes us into their kitchen and he starts whipping stuff out and starts serving us all sorts of hors d'oeuvres and dishes. And he starts the stove up and starts cooking us stuff.
Did you get roofied?
Well, we were the guy that Joe and I didn't know. He was like, "This is really weird," and Joe and I like, "No, it's cool. It's cool. We're all right. We're all right." So he served us probably $100 worth of food, and we finally started looking at his laptop trying to solve his problem, and so on and so forth. And when we went upstairs, he's like, "You can't take your cigars out," and I'm looking at my half-smoked Opus X. I'm like, He's like, "Don't worry, I'll give you a box of cigars." So. At the end of the night, we helped him out. We gave him some recommendations on how to improve, just his operations, what he's trying to do, and he's so grateful for us. He, I went to pay the tab; it was taken care of, and he gave me a box of cigars.
Nice.
From Red Phone Booth, and Paul, when I come up next time, I feel like I should share some of these with you since it was because I had the Security Weekly shirt on that started the whole thing rolling. So it's called Red Phone Booth. The owner partner that we worked with, a guy named Alpha, a really cool guy, and they're expanding. They're going to be opening up a new restaurant in Nashville soon, and of course Joe Gray lives in Knoxville, so he's sort of halfway in between. So if you're going to go anytime, anybody that's going to Atlanta anytime, check out Red Phone Booth. If you want to DM me, I could give you the number to get in, and look for a Red Phone Booth to open up in Nashville. I think he said early next year.
And they're like wicked secure now.
Yeah,
and they are so much more secure. So they offer memberships, so you don't have to go through the whole phone booth thing, and they use biometrics. You give a thumbprint to get in if you're a member, and so his issue was with the whole member database and securing all the privacy data. And Joe was suggesting how he could do it he was actually suggesting a cloud solution so he could reach it from both locations. But really cool, good drinks. Really good humidor. They had a good selection, and definitely our kind of place to hang out in if we need to figure out a way to get to Atlanta together.
Yep, adjusting in my head, adjusting our conference schedule so that we can work that in.
That's right. Well, actually, I think Sam has been talking to Joe. Hacker Halted will be there next year, and Joe said, "Hey, you should come to Hacker Halted," and he wants Security Weekly to come to Hacker Halted. So maybe it'll all come together and work out.
Sweet.
Hey, that sounds like a plan.
We're in.
Cool. All right, thank you. Back to the news.
Back to the news, which is nowhere near as interesting as
Jeff's story.
Jeff stories and smoked old fashions and Opus X cigars.
Yeah,
I feel like I did ourselves a disservice. We just smoked whatever was in the humidor and just poured whatever brown liquor we had into a glass. Like I feel like I'm
smoking like an Opus One and
like a third class citizen, over here.
Old
I'm smoking my
tail or something.
Super Bertha. Big gigantic.
That's an Opus I.
That's right. Yes, it's a 1S Super Bertha. The cigar was like this big when I started, and it was massive.
That's what you say all the time.
This thing just fell apart.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's what she said.
It's good.
Yeah, it was massive when I started.
It was. It's
so
small.
Jeff, have you looked into the Secure Shell vulnerability at all? Let's talk about Secure Shell.
Yeah.
I did a little bit, and I've gone around patching some things today.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Right?
I mean, I was at a conference, so I haven't had a chance to dig into the details. From what I saw, it looked like pretty devastating if you're using the particular libshell library.
Yep.
But it also looked like it was a pretty easy fix.
It's a patch. Yeah, they have a patch out for it. So it's just if you haven't patched up your SSH, and it is if you use libSSH, but if you open SSH, it's not the same thing. But a lot of Linux systems use libSSH and so forth. So be sure you're patched up.
What was interesting, though, because I was talking to a buddy of mine, actually a guy that used to work with me 20 years ago, and he was the one that told me about it, and we were talking about the ramifications of it. And, and this is one of the things that PCI tells you to do, but nobody really follows, and that's to have an inventory of what you have in your environment in terms of systems and operating systems and applications. And it's really hard because, OpenShell didn't happen to be affected. But how many people, when the Heartbleed thing came out, a couple years ago, and Paul and I were still at Tenable, all sorts of people were, clamoring, trying to figure out where is OpenShell, who's using it, and it was embedded in so many things. Same thing with this lib secure shell library. Right. How many people know that they have it, yet alone?
I mean, that all links back to the version. The API problem we talk about all the time, which is the APIs are so complex and you don't know what's embedded.
API, I'm so happy, Doug.
Well, it's like
you don't know. I mean, that is just. Oh,
I know. He got me. I finally gave in. I'm going to say
it's not AP.
Yeah, not appy.
Oh God, you had to just coax him into saying it, John.
I was just trying to clarify.
But yeah, I mean, you don't know what all's there. You don't know what products you have that have embedded those libraries in them when they were compiled. So you may not be able to see that thing, and it may be sitting in all kinds of places that you don't know about. So, and it's sad because it's SSH is like
and what's even worse is, and this is maybe just me being too much of an idealist, but there's too many companies out there, too many organizations, and there's too many software vulnerability management vendors that sort of perpetuate this. The way you do discovery, run a vulnerability scanner. I'm idealistic enough to think you ought to know what you have before you use it. I understand that can be daunting, but something doesn't sit right with me where the solution is, are we vulnerable to this? Is just simply to go run the scan, whatever the scan engine is. To me, you ought to have some clue of what you've got.
But I still think that's challenging today. And much of my time today is spent finding solutions that actually work to recommend to our listeners and such. And I think that if you're developing your own software, there is a great set of tools and multiple vendors that are offering great support for finding vulnerabilities in your open source software and libraries that you might be incorporating. Right. As we were talking about before, John, right? Like, you give developers a task and requirements, and you're like, okay, this is good. Like, I got some security processes in place. And they're like, yeah, I'm just going to go out and maybe not use, something like Conjure, or I'm going to go out and find whatever open source library that I can, just so I have to write less code, right? And it solves the problem for me. This is great. I'm just going to include it. There's a great set of tools to be able to identify that in your environment in an ongoing basis, right? And I mean, there's some gotchas and challenges there. I mean, having everyone on the same version control system and knowing that that's the one that everyone is using, because you got that development group that has their own version control system that doesn't have the protection software on it to identify the libraries that might be vulnerable. In any case, I think that's a good, giving good visibility into that particular problem. Yeah. And then we look at, I might have applications and software that are running on systems that I can scan, and I might be able to find things that way. But then what happens, and we're talking about, the library, what happens when it's in that IoT device, or it happens in that black box application that I have really no good way of testing.
Or I developed Cthulhu 1.0, which consists of 19 tools I bought from other developers that I have, I embedded them. I embedded IoT devices in there, and all this stuff becomes this giant, multi-tentacled monster that I'm selling. It's really tough to go back and say, let's. I know that PCI says we're supposed to do that.
Right, and to Jeff's point, I, of course, like you said, I was at Tenable during Heartbleed, and I was like, well, yeah, the best way to find this is just to go scan everything. But there's especially with a common library, so many different iterations. And I think, Tenable and others did a really good job of allowing organizations to find as many instances as possible. But, there's still gaps. There's still stuff that's hanging out there that's still vulnerable to Heartbleed today because it's hard to find that library. Not only that, we talk about all these great tools and techniques and tactics. this is work that an organization has to do to go uncover those hard things, right? Like a lot of things with a lot less effort are easy to identify. Some major missing patches in Windows. Yeah, you probably find that pretty easily. Find a library somewhere that it's got a vulnerability that's embedded in some application deep inside your network and an IoT device. You got to really be looking, and even at that, you might not find it.
You're raising a really good point, Paul, and I don't have an answer for it. I don't know if the industry has an answer for it, but in as much as we rely on the vulnerability scan engine, whichever one it is, or we get to use all of them to find these things. And I have to mention PCI again, because PCI has this peculiar problem of the system that typically introduces card data information into your ecosystem is not the point of sale system, because that's the cash register. It's the card reading device. It's the thing that we go up to the cash register and swipe, dip, tap our cards. And that thing historically has been what we would call in computer speak an ancillary device, an add-on. It's an attachment. And it's not, I don't know any scan engine, Nessus included, that it has a really good way, reliable way of reaching out to plug-in devices, ancillary devices on systems to find out what their vulnerabilities are. And I'm sure there's other examples out there. I'm just PCI is near and dear to me. But my point is, we rely on this particular type of technology to discover vulnerabilities, but we're limited in their abilities to do that. And there's things that are out there that are hard to find, not by the fault of the scan engines, but just by the nature of how things are architected and how things are put together.
And lots of scans are discrete. We do them and we stop. And then I go out and I have to replace this box that went bad, and I go pull an old one out of storage and put it back in, and all of a sudden the vulnerability is right there.
Yeah, and when I've spoken to some enterprise organizations that are, large enterprises that are doing a really good job in their minds of discovering everything new on their network, right? The best ones know, and they're like, yeah, we know we're not finding everything. And they often come to, us and say, well, how do I find that 1%? And like, what do you tell them? Like, yeah, you might find that 1% today. Tomorrow you got a brand new 1%, and that could be a completely different investigation to go find that new 1%. And I don't know that I have a really good solution to that problem, to be honest.
There may never be a really good.
And Jeff's example is perfect, right? I know that the next 100 stores that are, or let's say the next 50 stores that are rolling out, they're using new card readers that are different from the last 100. So even if I solve that in my existing 100 stores, this new one's rolling something out. And maybe you get ahead of the problem. We talked about shifting left, right? You get ahead of the problem and you're like, okay, we're going to do an evaluation of that, that add-on. And halfway through the rollout, they realize their manufacturer's going out of business, or they can get a cheaper one from this other manufacturer. And that's what's going to be rolling out. Hasn't gone through testing. How do I verify that doesn't have some kind of backdoor in it or some kind of vulnerability?
It's like whack-a-mole.
Well, how do you do it in an automated sense? Maybe we have to figure out how to do inventories of systems and devices and applications and components, and figure out a way to somehow find out what they're running. Have some sort of require the vendors, whoever's selling it to us, to give us some sort of idea of what's going on the inside. And if it's not their stuff, it's their third-party provider, and so on and so forth.
And identifying these devices is so hard too. Like, I'm looking at two-factor authentication keys, right? And we know that Yubico makes one of those sets of keys, right? And they've got a new set of them coming out, and they're always updating their product line. Largely, I don't know if they're necessarily manufactured in the U.S., but let's just say they're not manufactured in China, and I'm pretty sure that Yubico keys are not manufactured in China, right?
Taiwan.
I wouldn't be completely sure.
It's speculation on my point. But what has been pointed out is that Google's new Titan key is really just a Feitian key, and Feitian's a Chinese company that also makes Feitian branded keys that you can buy for cheap on Amazon, because I bought 2 of them. And now I'm kind of faced with this decision. I'm kind of putting this out there, feedback for my listeners. I know Feitian's had a vulnerability that was in fact fixed, but who do I trust with my two-factor authentication key? How do I know, like, what's the risk there? And I think that's what comes to the problem we're talking about. What's the risk that 1% poses? Unless you're finding it, you kind of don't know what the risk is, right?
Right.
But once you do identify it, and maybe it's that card reader, Jeff, right, was in this example, like, oh, well, this comes from Google, and someone along the way goes, hey, we can save $150,000, and, you know, Facian makes a reader that's the same thing, and we'll just switch to that. And it presents itself on the system when you identify that USB device as the same damn thing.
Right.
The ID is the same, the manufacturer is the same, and you're like, oh, like, we're good. Like, that's a reader that I know about, but really it's not. And then when I was looking at the multi-factor authentication keys, I was like, these are saying like they're the same thing, but what's the difference? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's
and you're not the typical consumer that's even going to ask that question,
right?
Yeah.
Most people are like, "Oh, it's the same, but it's cheaper. I want the cheaper one."
Right.
And that, you know, is a segue into a different conversation about, you know, consumers and end users. What are you going to make them go through for authentication? I think, you know, hardware-based tokens, as many of us have experienced, are not the right solution for end users. I think there is a security benefit, but is it enough to force your users to have that much inconvenience? Because the thing that sucks is when you get on an airplane and you're not checking a bag, and you put your bag in the overhead, which, by the way, has your multi-factor YubiKey authentication keys in it, and
your hip-hop outfit.
And your hip-hop outfit, and your cigars. And when you get to go get off the plane, that bag is no longer where you put it, and you're like, where did my bag go? And I'm like, shh. And that's another reason why I've disassociated those YubiKey keys with all my accounts and looking to go to something different, because for a period of almost 24 hours, someone else was in possession of my second factor key, which no longer works because... Again, it was out of my possession for a significant amount of time and out of my control.
Yeah. It's sort of scary that this was actually out there for like 5 years, right? So it's a 0 day, but it's like 5 years old, which sounds very odd on its surface. And like you go back to Heartbleed, like that was out there for how long before someone found it?
Oh, wait, you're back to libSSH?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you made a big jump that I had to process. Yeah, no, that was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the name of the bash shell vulnerability? It was around for 20 years, until somebody discovered it.
And so, like, probably people knew about it,
sure,
but they don't want to expose it because they're using it, right?
Well,
so for how long were people actually using this?
Probably as long as it's been out there. Somebody knew about it. It's just not everybody wants to go in there and trash you so that they get caught. So a lot of people want to keep things to themselves and keep them subtle.
Exactly. So
and they can exploit lots and lots of devices for their own ends and not get revealed. So it may have been used ever since it was available.
And why does that happen? Like, say with SSL, when Heartbleed came out, I wrote a blog that talked about how actually like the equivalent of like 2 people actually work on OpenSSL, right? And that was like news to a lot of people. So like that
was a wake up for the open source. Sorry to cut you off, John, but it was my subsequent reading about that issue. That was a huge wake up call, and they have since then been working to change that environment and put more funding to get more developers on these, especially these critical
Google,
applications.
Right? Like I noticed that there was a big difference like after that, because that's like the plumbing layer, and you have like billion-dollar companies who rely on that. And they put nothing back, right? And the way I explained it is like you see open sources like take a penny, leave a penny, in the ashtray or the little dish at the gas station.
I do use that as an ashtray sometimes. Yeah, that's fine.
Right. Yeah.
Just to ash my cigar right in the change going through.
But you either have like the billion-dollar companies just taking all the pennies, or you have Paul putting his ashes in there.
That's right. That's my contribution back.
John's touching on something that's sort of a fundamental thing, because from the very beginning, 25, 30 years ago, the hacker community put all their faith and trust in open source because you could receive the source code, lots of eyes on it. That was the presumption. That open within the hacker community. Now within the corporate community, those that listen to the vendors and buy from vendors, it was always, well, we need to have commercial off the shelf. We need to have commercial stuff. I had countless companies that had policies that said we don't use open source, we only use commercial products and applications and so forth. And we as the hacker community that believed that we're always right and we're smart and we know everything, had this basic sort of paradigm or theorem that says open source is better, and yet it turned out, not so much, not necessarily.
That's a very good point. Like my experience as a developer, and I wrote this at the blog at the time too, that just exactly what you said. Just because it's out there and everyone can view it, they think it's safe. There's nothing in there, right? So this update for Heartbleed was written by someone who was like one of the top developers for OpenSSL, right? And so like when I was a developer, if some guy who wrote this was like the best developer at the company, and I have like a million things going on, am I gonna take my time to go review that? Like, no, that's so and so. He's good. I'm sure it's fine. I'm not gonna look at it, right?
As an end user of open source, I'm like, holy shit, it compiled. Like, sweet. I don't have to go look at the source code or modify the source code. Like, I'm good, right? And that's most of its role, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, and the people's time's very valuable. Not go back and look at that. And it has the opposite effect, because everyone can look at it. Not everyone does. Now, you send me an email with just me on it. It says, look at this and review it. I'm going to look at it. You send it to like everyone in the company. It's written by the best guy in the company.
Yeah.
Why would I review it?
Is that so? And it's also that sociology thing of when it's out there, like, oh, well, someone else is looking for security bugs in it, right? There was whatever that. There's a name for it. There's the famous case in New York. Student study where they're studying sociology of where someone was getting murdered, and
the 152nd Street cannibal study,
car crash or something.
No, it was a murder where everybody witnessed it.
Yes,
I forget.
And everybody else figures somebody called, and I know
people that are listening to this after its release are yelling the name out in their cars.
You're idiots.
It's idiots. It was this, but anyway, that's the same. It's the same concept.
No, but if you stop and listen to what John's saying, I mean, he's basically saying that we're in the hacker development community just as guilty as all those people that we like to say are stupid and lazy. We're doing the same thing, or we've done the same thing.
Right.
There's an implicit assumption in open source too that not only are people looking at the source, they're actually using their brain and intelligently analyzing the source for free. Right.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
That's horseshit. It's not happening.
Right. I agree.
No, it's not free, right? So I deal with mostly the open source side of things at CyberArk for Conjure and our other tools, and some people view it as like, hey, everything's free, and I've talked to a lot of vendors, right? So either people, they'll give back to the community, they'll write features, or if you charge them for it, they basically expect you to do all the work for them.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm a master at Google. It was Kitty Genovese in March of 1964.
Where everybody listened to her getting killed, and I remember that. And she was like screaming, and everybody just said, somebody else will call.
Yep. Thank you, Jeff.
And that can't happen these days because everybody has smart devices. They would videotape it.
Well, that's true. Everybody would have it on.
Put it on YouTube.
It'd be on YouTube like before the police call got carried out.
Yeah. Yep. It reminds me, I want to give our labs team a plug. So like they do a lot of research. We have a bunch of like ex-Israeli intelligent people working at the company just trying to find issues.
Ex-intelligent? Does that mean
military intelligence?
They're not intelligent. They're not. Oh, intelligence.
They had to leave that when they left.
I didn't want you to get in trouble, John. But you said ex-intelligent people. I didn't want them to be offended.
You can't take that with you when you go.
But like they did a lot of research recently with Jenkins, right? And one of our researchers was credited with finding like 3 to 6 different vulnerabilities in Jenkins, right? Okay. So like, how long were those out there? And that's just him going and like trying to break it, like find different ways you can break it.
Probably not that much time either. Actually, your labs people are awesome. We did a segment with your labs people a couple of years ago. They found that they could force a machine or flip into safe mode. And basically, if you get a Windows machine into safe mode, like none of the protections work.
It's crazy. Like they wrote a series of blogs, and I had to help them with the blogs. And I say blogs loosely because they were each like 15 pages long. They wrote like a script, or they wrote like their own tool to like do this or that, and like it's very detailed. And like you guys should definitely check it out on the cyberark.com page. It's pretty
awesome.
Cool.
Sure.
Awesome. Well, I think that rounds out the show. Thank you, everyone, for participating. John, thank you for visiting. Reminder to our listeners, contra.org/securityweekly. You go mess around with the open source tool. I think that's really cool and a good thing to do. It should end up on your list of things to try out. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next time. Doug, take us out.
Over on 10-7.
Out.